The courtroom was silent until he walked in. A man in a perfectly tailored navy suit, gold cufflinks glinting under the fluorescent lights, and an arrogance so thick you could almost hear it before he spoke. Everyone stood as the judge entered. Everyone except him. He sat back, legs crossed, chin slightly raised, eyes scanning the room like he owned it. The clerk's voice echoed through the chamber. All rise for the Honorable Judge Caprio. But this man, Vincent Morrison, one of Providence's wealthiest developers, didn't move an inch. And in that single, silent act, the air in the courtroom changed. What kind of man refuses to stand in a courtroom? Why would someone risk his freedom just to prove he's above everyone else? This wasn't just a case of traffic violations. This was about pride, power, and the illusion that money can bend justice. And that illusion was about to shatter, right here in front of everyone. The judge looked up from the bench. His voice was calm but firm. "Sir, please stand for the court." Vincent didn't even look at him at first. He turned slowly, smiled like he was indulging a child, and said, "I'm comfortable where I am, Judge." The words landed like a stone in water. Shock rippled through the entire courtroom. Even the air felt heavier. The judge had been on the bench for 40 years. He'd seen angry defendants, nervous ones, even a few who cracked jokes to lighten the mood. But this? He'd never seen anything like this. Vincent wasn't drunk. He wasn't confused. He was defiant. What happens when arrogance meets authority? That's what everyone in the room was about to find out. The judge's eyes didn't waver. "Standing for the court is not a request," he said evenly. "It's a sign of respect for the law and for the people it protects." Vincent laughed, not nervously, not out of misunderstanding. He laughed like it was all a joke. "Judge," he said, "I've been standing all my life. Today, I think I'll sit." A few people gasped. One woman clutched her purse tighter. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. In that moment, Vincent Morrison wasn't just disrespecting the judge. He was disrespecting everyone who believed in fairness. The judge straightened his robe and studied the man before him. This wasn't a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. This was a grown man worth millions, daring the justice system to challenge him. But what Vincent didn't know was that this courtroom wasn't for sale. The case file on the judge's desk told its own story. 17 traffic violations in just 3 months. Speeding, reckless driving, ignoring signals, each one a small act of defiance, stacking up into a portrait of a man who believed rules were for other people. The judge sipped his morning coffee and glanced again at the file, then at Vincent, then back at the file. 17 violations, and not a hint of remorse. The courtroom's wooden benches creaked as people shifted in their seats. The air smelled faintly of coffee and tension. Everyone could feel it, the moment before something big happens. The kind of moment where justice meets ego head-on. The judge spoke again, softly this time. "Mr. Morrison, I'll give you one more opportunity to stand and show the respect due to this court." Vincent leaned back, clasped his hands behind his head, and smirked. "Make me." The room froze. A single whisper echoed. Did he just say that to a judge? Yes, he did. And what happened next would remind everyone that in a courtroom, respect isn't optional. It's the foundation of justice itself. The judge rose from his seat, slowly, deliberately. He'd faced mobsters, con artists, and career criminals in his time. But there was something uniquely unsettling about this moment. Not because Vincent was dangerous, but because he was proud of his disrespect. This was a man who thought wealth was armor, that the law was just another employee he could hire or fire at will. And for the first time in his privileged life, he was about to learn otherwise. The judge folded his hands and spoke in a tone that carried decades of experience. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "money may buy comfort, but it does not buy dignity. And it certainly doesn't buy immunity." The people in the courtroom exchanged glances. Some nodded quietly. Others simply watched, eyes wide. It wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a battle between arrogance and accountability. And somewhere in that heavy silence, you could almost hear justice getting ready to stand its ground. But Vincent wasn't done testing the limits. What he said next would turn a routine hearing into a story that still echoes through this courthouse today. The tension inside Judge Caprio's courtroom that morning could be felt in the air, thick, unmoving, and electric. Every person seated on those wooden benches knew they were about to witness something unusual. They come expecting routine traffic hearings, a few fines, some lectures, maybe a handful of embarrassed apologies. But what they were witnessing instead was a test of respect itself. Vincent Morrison sat perfectly still, one leg crossed over the other, hands folded like a man waiting for his morning paper. The judge's gentle command still hung in the air. "Sir, please stand for the court." And yet, Vincent didn't budge. His eyes locked on the bench, but his expression never changed, cold, dismissive, and utterly sure of his own power. How does a man so rich, so powerful, reach a point where basic decency feels optional? That was the question echoing in every mind that morning. The file in front of Judge Caprio told one story: 17 traffic violations in 90 days. But Vincent's body language told another. It said, "Rules are for other people, not for me." The clerk, Christina, shifted in her seat, trying to keep her composure. Officer Rodriguez, the bailiff, stood at the ready, his eyes quietly scanning the courtroom for signs of escalation. And the rest of the room, ordinary people, retirees, parents, young drivers, watched with growing disbelief. Vincent Morrison wasn't some troubled young man making poor choices. He was one of the city's wealthiest developers, a man whose name adorned half the new high-rises downtown. He was used to being admired, obeyed, and feared in equal measure. But today, none of that mattered, because inside a courtroom, everyone starts the same. But Vincent didn't believe that. Not yet. The judge spoke again, his voice calm, patient, measured by years of experience. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "this courtroom stands as a symbol of equality under the law. No one here is above anyone else." Vincent smiled faintly, glancing at his manicured nails as though the judge were an employee making small talk. "Judge," he replied, his tone light but dripping with arrogance, "I employ more people than anyone in this city. I pay more taxes than everyone here combined. I think I've earned the right to sit when I'm tired." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. People exchanged looks of disbelief. A single mother, holding her baby, shook her head in silent frustration. An elderly veteran, his hands trembling from age, stood straighter than ever, despite the pain it clearly caused him. And there sat Vincent, a millionaire wrapped in silk and entitlement, convinced that his wealth excused him from respect. In that moment, the courtroom wasn't divided by income. It was divided by character. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly, studying the man before him. He'd seen this kind of arrogance before, but rarely so proudly displayed. This wasn't ignorance. It was defiance. And defiance in a courtroom isn't just disrespect. It's dangerous. It chips away at the foundation of justice itself. "Mr. Morrison," the judge said carefully, "you are entitled to your opinion, but not to your own rules. The law applies equally to everyone." Vincent's smirk widened. "The law," he said, "is whatever people like me decide it is. We write the checks, we fund the campaigns, we make the rules." He paused, letting his words hang in the air like smoke. "You think this little courtroom matters to someone like me?" Christina froze mid-note. Even the bailiff looked startled. You could hear the faint buzz of the ceiling lights and the baby's soft whimper from the back of the room. Everything else was stilled. No one in that courtroom had ever heard such bold contempt for the law, spoken directly to a judge. The judge didn't respond immediately. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at the flag behind him, then looked back at Vincent. His face was unreadable, but those who knew Judge Caprio could sense it, the quiet anger that only appears when something sacred is being violated. He spoke softly, but every word carried weight. "Mr. Morrison, your wealth gives you influence, yes. But influence is not power over justice, and it never will be." For a fleeting second, Vincent's smile faltered. He wasn't used to hearing no. The young mother in the back bounced her child gently, her eyes never leaving the bench. The veteran clenched his cap tighter in his hand, nodding faintly in approval. The courtroom, once filled with routine cases, was now united in silent solidarity, with the judge, with decency, with the idea that respect still mattered. But Vincent wasn't done testing that belief. He was about to cross a line that would change everything. He leaned back again, hands behind his head, and said two words that dropped like thunder. "Make me." A gasp filled the air. Christina's pen slipped from her hand. Even the bailiff froze mid-step. It wasn't just what Vincent said. It was how he said it. Calm, casual, with the confidence of a man who believed consequences were for other people. The judge's voice turned to ice. "Mr. Morrison, you are now bordering on contempt of court." Vincent chuckled, unconcerned. "Contempt? Judge, I could buy this courthouse and turn it into a parking lot. I could buy your salary for 10 years and not notice the expense." He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "I could buy your job if I wanted to." Silence. And in that silence, the balance of the room shifted from arrogance to outrage, from defiance to disbelief. The veteran looked disgusted. The young mother shook her head again, whispering something under her breath. One of the teenagers in the back muttered, "Man, he's going to regret that." Judge Caprio finally stood, a rare gesture from a man who preferred calm over confrontation. But this wasn't about pride. It was about principle. "Mr. Morrison," he said quietly, "you're about to learn that money can buy you comfort, but it can't buy you out of consequences." Vincent scoffed. "You can't be serious." The judge turned to the bailiff. "Officer Rodriguez, please escort Mr. Morrison to the holding cell until he's ready to conduct himself appropriately." The bailiff nodded once and began walking toward the millionaire. And that's when everything exploded. Vincent pushed himself up from his chair, pointing at the judge. "You can't do this to me. Do you have any idea who I am?" The judge's reply was calm, steady, and unforgettable. "Yes, Mr. Morrison. You're a man who believes his bank account is bigger than the law. Let's find out if you're right." The courtroom broke its silence, not with noise, but with understanding. Every face there reflected the same thought. Maybe, just maybe, this was the day someone would finally show Vincent Morrison that justice cannot be bought. But as the bailiff approached, Vincent's arrogance turned into something darker, something the entire courtroom would remember for years. The moment Officer Rodriguez took his first step toward Vincent Morrison, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed. It was no longer just tense, it was charged. Like the seconds before a thunderstorm when the air turns heavy and every sound echoes. The audience didn't blink. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed louder. Vincent rose from his seat, but not out of respect, out of outrage. "Don't you dare touch me," he barked, pointing at the bailiff like he was ordering around a waiter. "I'm warning you. I'll have your badge. I'll have your job. I'll have this entire courthouse shut down." But threats don't work when the walls around you are made of law. And inside this courtroom, no amount of money could buy silence or surrender. The judge's tone stayed calm, measured, steady, deliberate. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "you've made your position clear. Now allow this court to make its position clear." Officer Rodriguez, a veteran bailiff with 20 years of experience, reached out and placed a hand lightly on Vincent's arm. "Sir," he said politely, "please come with me." For a second, it looked like Vincent might cooperate. But then something inside him snapped. He yanked his arm free, glaring at the bailiff with fiery contempt. "You think you can touch me? Do you know what kind of lawyers I can afford?" The crowd gasped softly, a sound that echoed through the courtroom like wind through a canyon. Everyone knew this wasn't just about standing anymore. This was about control. And when a man built his entire life on control, losing it can feel worse than losing freedom. Vincent turned toward the audience, scanning faces like enemies in a war. "You," he shouted, pointing at the young mother in the back. "You think this is justice? This is a circus." The woman flinched but didn't speak. Her baby whimpered softly. The courtroom silence made every word sharper, heavier. "And you," Vincent snapped, turning toward the elderly veteran who had stood earlier despite the pain in his back. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching someone successful get dragged down by people who will never be anything." The old man didn't flinch. He just looked at Vincent calmly, his voice quiet but cutting through the room like steel. "Son," he said, "I fought in 2 wars so men like you could walk free. But not so you could forget what respect means." The courtroom went still again. Vincent's lips tightened. He'd just been called son by a man who'd earned the right to use that word. But instead of humility, his pride flared hotter. Sometimes, it's not anger that destroys a man. It's ego refusing to learn. "I don't care about your wars," Vincent shouted. "I don't care about this court, this judge, or any of you. You're all nobodies compared to me." That word, nobodies, hung in the air like poison. People shifted uncomfortably. A few even looked away, unable to watch the spectacle of a man dismantling his own dignity. Judge Caprio's patience finally reached its limit. "Mr. Morrison," he said firmly, "you've crossed from disrespect into contempt, and now into criminal threat. You've insulted this court, this community, and this country. Officer Rodriguez, take him into custody." Vincent's face twisted in disbelief. "You can't do this to me. I'm Vincent Morrison. I own half this city." The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "you own buildings. You don't own people. And you certainly don't own justice." And just like that, the man who thought he was untouchable finally met the one thing money couldn't buy: accountability. Rodriguez stepped forward again. This time, Vincent didn't resist physically, but his words came out like venom. "You'll regret this. Every one of you. I'll destroy your careers." No one responded. They didn't need to, because everyone in that courtroom understood what was really happening. They weren't watching a man being punished. They were watching a man confront himself. As the bailiff cuffed his wrists, the metallic click of the handcuffs echoed like a verdict. The young mother held her baby tighter. The veteran stood straight, saluting quietly as the millionaire who had mocked him was led past. The audience didn't cheer or clap. They simply watched, silent witnesses to the fall of arrogance. But even as he was led away, Vincent couldn't stop fighting the truth. "This isn't over," he yelled. "You have no idea who you're messing with." The judge looked up from the bench, his voice steady as marble. "You're right, Mr. Morrison. This isn't over. You'll remain in holding until you're ready to apologize. Not to me, but to everyone you disrespected." Vincent froze for a second, as if the words had struck him. But then, predictably, his pride reassembled itself. He smirked and shook his head. "Keep dreaming, Judge." Officer Rodriguez escorted him out, the heavy door closing behind them with a hollow thud. And then, silence. Sometimes silence is louder than shouting, because everyone in that room knew what they had just witnessed, a moment when pride finally met its wall. Christina, the clerk, leaned closer to the judge and whispered, "In 20 years, I've never seen anything like that." The judge exhaled slowly. "Neither have I." The people in the courtroom began murmuring softly. Some shook their heads. Others looked thoughtful. The young mother whispered to her child, "See, honey, even the rich have to follow rules." The judge sat back, quietly observing the humanity around him. That was what justice was about. Not punishment, but understanding. Not wealth or power, but equality and respect. But justice isn't just about winning, it's about teaching. And Vincent Morrison's lesson had only just begun. Downstairs, in the holding cell, Vincent paced like a caged lion. He demanded his phone, his lawyers, his driver. He shouted at the guard, threatened lawsuits, and declared the entire courthouse corrupt. But hour by hour, the reality began to sink in. No one was listening. No one cared about his money or his titles. He was just another man in a cold room with metal bars. And for perhaps the first time in his life, Vincent Morrison was alone, with no one left to impress, no one left to control. And that's where the cracks in arrogance begin, not in public humiliation, but in private silence. Upstairs, Judge Caprio continued hearing other cases. Parking tickets, missed payments, nervous citizens explaining honest mistakes. But something about this day lingered in the air. Everyone knew they had witnessed a defining moment, where justice reminded everyone it still had a pulse. As the morning turned to afternoon, Officer Rodriguez knocked softly on the judge's chamber door. "Judge," he said, "Mr. Morrison's still down there, still shouting, still refusing to apologize." The judge nodded. "Then he stays there. Sometimes Time does what words can't. But time has a way of humbling even the proudest hearts. And for Vincent, that humbling was only hours away. The steel door of the holding cell slammed shut behind Vincent Morrison, echoing through the basement hallway of the courthouse like a verdict. For the first time in years, the man who once commanded boardrooms and bulldozers sat in silence. Not in a penthouse office or luxury car, but on a cold, metal bench. No assistants, no phone calls, no deals. Just four gray walls, a ticking clock, and the hum of fluorescent lights. They say the higher you climb, the harder you fall. For Vincent Morrison, that fall wasn't from a building. It was from his own ego. Upstairs, the courthouse carried on as if nothing had happened. Judge Caprio continued hearing cases, his tone gentle, his patience intact. But beneath that calm surface, even he couldn't stop replaying the scene in his mind. The defiance, the arrogance, the final two words, "Make me." Down in the cell, Vincent's anger was still burning. He slammed his hand against the wall. "This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything wrong." The officer stationed outside said nothing. He'd seen this before. Men who mistook defiance for strength, only to discover silence was stronger. Hours passed. Each minute stretched longer than the last. The air grew heavier, his fury quieter. That's how pride breaks. Not in a single explosion, but in a slow, quiet collapse. Vincent paced the floor like a lion in a cage. He tried to call his lawyers, but the phone was restricted. He demanded his assistant, but no one came. His empire, the one he believed made him invincible, suddenly felt a million miles away. He looked at his reflection in the metal sink. For the first time in years, he saw not the confident, commanding businessman, but a tired, angry man who didn't recognize his own eyes. And deep down, beneath layers of arrogance and denial, something uncomfortable began to stir. Shame. Shame is a quiet teacher. It doesn't yell. It whispers the truth you've been avoiding. By noon, the courthouse had emptied out. Judge Caprio sat in his chambers, writing case notes, when Officer Rodriguez knocked softly on the door. "Judge," he said, "our guest downstairs is still holding out. He says he'll sue everyone in this building." The judge set down his pen and nodded. "He'll tire himself out eventually. Pride always does." Meanwhile, in the holding cell, Vincent finally sat still. The anger that had fueled him was running out. In its place came exhaustion and confusion. He replayed every moment from that morning. The judge's calm tone, the veteran's quiet words, the mother holding her baby. Each memory hit him like a slow echo of something he didn't want to face. When arrogance fades, truth finally finds room to speak. He leaned his head back against the wall. For a man who'd spent his life measuring success in square footage and stock returns, humility was foreign currency. He'd always believed the world respected him for his wealth. But sitting there, stripped of his power, he realized something. No one respected him. They feared him. And fear is a poor substitute for dignity. The thought lingered. It gnawed at him like guilt. He wanted to argue with it, but he couldn't. Not this time. For the first time, Vincent Morrison wasn't fighting the system. He was fighting himself. Hours slipped by. Outside, the light dimmed into the soft glow of afternoon. The courthouse grew quieter, the hum of air vents louder. Finally, at 2 p.m., Officer Rodriguez appeared at the cell door. He didn't look angry or smug, just patient. "Mr. Morrison," he said gently, "the judge is still in chambers. He asked me to check. Are you ready to show proper respect?" Vincent's first instinct was to snap back, but the words caught in his throat. He wasn't ready to admit defeat, but he also wasn't sure what he was defending anymore. He began, then stopped. Rodriguez waited silently. "I'll think about it," Vincent muttered, his voice smaller than before. Rodriguez nodded. "That's progress, sir. Sometimes, thinking is the start of respect." He walked away, leaving Vincent in the soft echo of his own breathing. And that's when something inside Vincent cracked. Not in anger, but in realization. He stared down at his cufflinks, tiny golden symbols of his status, and wondered why they suddenly looked meaningless. He thought of the judge's words, "You don't own people. You don't own justice." And for the first time, Those words didn't sound like an insult. They sounded like truth. He thought of the young mother, juggling her baby and her dignity. He thought of the old veteran, standing straight despite the pain. He thought of how they had shown more grace in one morning than he had in his entire career. The contrast hit him like cold water. Humility doesn't arrive loudly. It creeps in through the cracks pride leaves behind. By 2:30, Officer Rodriguez returned. This time, Vincent was standing near the bars, calm, quiet, collected, but not defiant. "Officer," he said softly, I think I'm ready to speak with the judge." Rodriguez nodded. "Understood, sir." He radioed upstairs. Moments later, the judge agreed to see him. When they brought Vincent back into the courtroom, the change was visible. Same expensive suit, same sharp features, but the arrogance was gone. He stood straighter, not out of pride this time, but respect. And in that moment, the courtroom wasn't witnessing a defendant. It was witnessing a man being rebuilt. Judge Caprio looked up as Vincent entered. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "are you prepared to conduct yourself appropriately in this courtroom?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Are you prepared to show respect to the court and everyone in it?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Are you prepared to apologize?" Vincent hesitated, his throat tightening. He looked around. The benches were nearly empty now, but the veteran was still there. Their eyes met. I want to apologize," Vincent said finally. "My behavior was unacceptable. I disrespected the court, the people, and myself. I was wrong." The words were stiff, rehearsed even, but for the first time, they were also real. That it wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a beginning, and beginnings are often disguised as endings. The judge studied him quietly, then asked, "Mr. Morrison, what have you learned today?" Vincent thought for a long moment. "That money doesn't make me better than anyone else," he said slowly. "And that respect can't be bought. It has to be earned." The judge nodded. "Then perhaps, Mr. Morrison, this courtroom has served its purpose." In that instant, something subtle yet profound happened. Vincent lowered his head, not in defeat, but in understanding. The courtroom felt different now, not as a place of punishment, but of transformation. Justice isn't about breaking a man. It's about giving him the chance to rebuild himself. The courtroom was quieter than it had been all morning. The air felt different, lighter somehow, though no one could quite explain why. Vincent Morrison stood at the center of that silence. His once perfect posture softened, his voice stripped of arrogance. He wasn't the man who had strutted into the courtroom hours earlier. He was smaller now, not weaker, but human. Judge Caprio folded his hands and studied him thoughtfully. Behind that steady gaze was a man who had seen thousands of cases, from the broken to the bitter, from the innocent to the proud. But this one carried something rare. Transformation. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks softly and changes a man forever. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Morrison," he began, "you've apologized for your behavior, and I appreciate that. But apology alone does not erase the pattern we've seen here. 17 traffic violations in 3 months, a complete disregard for the law, and earlier today, a shocking display of contempt." Vincent nodded slightly, accepting every word. He didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. That silence, that humility, was the first true proof that something had shifted. The judge continued, "This courtroom does not exist to humiliate people. It exists to uphold accountability, to remind us that justice applies equally to the rich, to the poor, to everyone." He paused, letting the weight of that truth sink in. Because the law doesn't measure a man by his wealth, it measures him by his character. Vincent's eyes lowered. His fingers nervously adjusted the edge of his sleeve, a gesture that betrayed discomfort, but also humility. The same gold cufflinks that once symbolized arrogance now looked like chains of pride he was trying to remove. "Mr. Morrison," the judge said, "the people in this courtroom today, the mother with her child, the veteran who stood despite pain, they reminded us all what respect looks like. You saw it and you mocked it. But I believe you've begun to understand what they already knew." Vincent looked up, his voice quiet. "I have, Your Honor, more than I ever did before." The judge nodded. "That's a start. But real change is proven through action." And with that, justice began to write its own ending, not cruel, but fair. Judge Caprio reached for his pen and spoke clearly for the record. For your 17 traffic violations, I'm imposing the maximum fines allowed by law, plus full court costs. Vincent nodded. No protest, no hesitation. He accepted it like a man who finally understood the cost of his choices. Additionally, the judge continued, you will complete 40 hours of community service, not in your offices, not in your companies, but with low-income families. You will work alongside people who struggle every day to afford what you take for granted. A soft murmur of approval rippled through the few people remaining in the courtroom. And finally, the judge said, setting his pen down, you will attend a defensive driving course and complete it in person. This isn't a punishment. It's an opportunity to learn responsibility. You've proven you can control companies. Now prove you can control a car and yourself. Justice wasn't destroying him. It was rebuilding him piece by piece. Vincent swallowed hard. Yes, Your Honor. The judge wasn't done. And one more thing. You are banned from appearing in my courtroom for 6 months. If you receive even a parking ticket, another judge will handle it. When you return here, if you ever do, I expect to meet the man you are becoming, not the man who walked in today. Vincent nodded again, his eyes moist. There was no pride left, just reflection. The judge's tone softened. You told me earlier, Mr. Morrison, that you employ many people, pay many taxes, and contribute to this city's economy. That's commendable. But success without humility, he paused, is just arrogance with better furniture. The courtroom went still. Even Christina, the clerk, lowered her pen to listen. The sentence wasn't just legal, it was moral. It carried the weight of generations who believed in dignity over dominance. And in that moment, justice didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a mirror reflecting the truth. The judge continued, his voice steady but kind. Your wealth gives you opportunities and responsibilities, not privileges and exemptions. Use your influence to uplift others, not to look down upon them. Vincent breathed deeply, a small, trembling exhale that sounded almost like relief. I will, Your Honor, he said softly. The judge nodded once more. Then we are done here. As Vincent turned to leave, his steps were slower, heavier, but measured. No longer a march of entitlement, but the steady walk of a man beginning to carry the weight of understanding. Sometimes, the greatest victories happen quietly, when a man finally kneels before his own conscience. The door closed behind him, and for a brief moment, the room was still. Then, the veteran approached the bench. Judge, he said, voice gravelly but warm, you did the right thing today. That man insulted every person who ever served this country, but you showed him what honor really looks like. The judge smiled faintly. Honor isn't about who salutes first. It's about who stands for what's right, even when no one else does. The veteran nodded, his eyes glistening. And as he left, he touched his cap once more, a small salute to the law, to the lesson, and perhaps even to the man who'd finally learned it. Justice, after all, isn't about revenge, it's about restoration. Hours later, as the sun dipped low over Providence, Judge Caprio gathered his papers, preparing to leave. Christina entered quietly. Judge, she said, I've worked here 20 years. I've seen anger, fear, even tears. But today, I saw something else. I saw change. The judge smiled gently. Change is what justice hopes for, Christina. The law punishes to correct, but its highest purpose is to heal. He looked toward the door, remembering Vincent's final expression, a mix of regret and humility. I think he'll remember today for the rest of his life, the judge said softly. Christina nodded. So will everyone who was here. Because true justice doesn't just change verdicts, it changes people. Outside, the courthouse steps glowed orange in the evening sun. A city bus rolled past, carrying workers home. Life moved on, as it always does. But for those who had been in that courtroom, for the veteran, the mother, the clerk, the judge, something had shifted. They had seen proof that even in a world driven by wealth and status, the law still had a heart. And somewhere, in that quiet city dusk, A millionaire named Vincent Morrison was feeling the first peace he'd known in years. Not because he won, but because he learned. When justice is fair, even the guilty walk away wiser. The courtroom was empty now, bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. The echo of footsteps and murmured words had faded, leaving only the stillness of reflection. For those who had been present, the mother, the veteran, the clerk, and even the judge, the day had been more than a hearing. It had been a lesson in humility, accountability, and the enduring power of respect. Vincent Morrison had left the courtroom hours earlier, but his absence was louder than his presence had ever been. No longer the brash, untouchable millionaire, he had become something far more human. A man confronted by his own choices, challenged to reflect, and given the chance to change. That it's rare to witness a fall of ego transform into a rise of character. But today, everyone did. Later that evening, Judge Caprio returned to his chambers and found a note slipped under his door. It was from Vincent. "Judge, thank you for your patience and for holding me accountable. Today, I learned that respect is more valuable than wealth, and humility is more powerful than influence. I will carry this lesson with me forever." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was extraordinary. A man who had thought himself above the law had finally understood that justice is not about fear or money. It's about conscience and courage. Sometimes the most important courtroom victories happen not at the bench, but within the heart of a man. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the transformation that had taken place in a small courthouse in Providence. People walked past the steps without knowing they had just witnessed a millionaire's awakening. Yet for those who were present, the story lingered like a quiet ripple in a pond, a reminder that justice, when exercised with integrity, can teach lessons far beyond the law books. The veteran returned to his home, still shaking his head at the day's events. He thought of Vincent, humbled but learning, and of the mother holding her child, who had reminded everyone of what dignity looks like even in the smallest acts. The clerk, Christina, quietly filed away the final papers, feeling a rare sense of hope in the heart of the justice system. True justice doesn't only correct wrongs, it inspires change, respect, and a moral awakening. Weeks later, Vincent completed his community service, working with families who struggled daily to make ends meet. He showed up early, listened, helped, and learned. It wasn't easy, it wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and it was transformative. When he returned to the courtroom months later, he wasn't the man who had mocked the law or disrespected the judge. He was quieter, more thoughtful, carrying a sense of accountability that had never existed before. The judge observed him, noting the subtle changes, a nod of acknowledgement, a sincere greeting to those around him, a demeanor that finally reflected the lessons he had learned. And that's the true power of justice. It changes hearts as much as it enforces laws. The story of Vincent Morrison soon spread through the city, not for the scandal, but for the redemption. People discussed the case, not to gossip, but to reflect on integrity, responsibility, and the enduring value of respect and family. It became more than a courtroom story. It became a lesson for all who heard it. Even now, years later, visitors to the courthouse remember the day a millionaire was reminded that no wealth can replace honesty, that accountability is not optional, and that moral courage is always stronger than ego. Because in the end, justice is not about punishment. It's about teaching, guiding, and restoring what arrogance tries to destroy. As the courthouse doors closed each evening, Judge Caprio often reflected on that morning. He remembered Vincent's initial defiance, the tension that filled the air, and the ultimate moment when humility replaced arrogance. It was a reminder to all, no matter how high someone climbs, respect, integrity, and family values are what truly define a life well lived. And that lesson, quietly learned in a small courtroom, continues to echo across the city, a timeless story of justice and redemption that if you found this true courtroom story of Vincent Morrison's downfall and redemption inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life legal drama, millionaire lessons, and powerful stories of justice. Served. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on the most gripping courtroom stories, moral lessons, and true stories of accountability, humility, and respect. Your engagement helps spread these stories that teach the value of integrity, family, and responsibility, because every viewer deserves to see justice in action. Remember, justice isn't just a concept, it's a lesson that can change lives.